I'm Jim Krumm, here with Colorado's Best Home Inspections, here to show you what a basic home inspection is. Thanks for having me out today. When I start, I take a bunch of pictures. To begin with, I always take a couple pictures of the front of the house. These are your memory. They're also, unfortunately, if you do have an issue down the road where somebody is questioning something, it's your get out of jail card free. If you can't see it, you can't report it, you can't inspect it. So the more pictures you take, the better. I include defect pictures in my report. Some guys include a lot more pictures than that, but I don't like to make things hard to read, difficult, things like that. Our primary concern here is safety. So whenever we have trip hazards, things like this, we're going to point them out. I'll get a couple pictures of the house, and then we'll talk about the driveway. Now, we consider anything with a 3/4 of an inch difference to be a trip hazard. So this driveway, we can see that we have a couple of trip hazards on it. We can also see from these little holes here that it's been mud jacked before. That means it's settled once, they've jacked it back up, and it's settled again. So chances are, if they have somebody out mud jacking it, it's going to settle for a third time. The long-term solution is probably going to be to replace this driveway. Your client's going to be, incur a $5,000 expense there at some point. So it's fairly substantial. You want to make sure they know about it, and you want to make sure that they know that it'll probably reoccur. It's not your job to tell them prices, but if you know a few in your head, that's a good idea. Okay, I like to walk on the sidewalks. When we're inspecting a house, I'll walk on the grass, but the last thing I want to do is come up straight to a house through the grass. It just doesn't show respect. If a seller is at the house, they don't like it. Again, we can see on this sidewalk here, we have mud jacking. It looks like it's settled here. We may have a little erosion. Again, this sidewalk, long term, they're probably going to have to replace it. At least point it out to them. It isn't a trip hazard right now, so it's not an immediate concern, but at one point it is going to cost them some money. We have, looks like vinyl siding, brick veneer. Brick is really nice because it helps shows foundation movement. So, I like to look, make sure you don't have a horizontal crack here. That would give me an indication the wall is pushing in. Of course, we're looking for stair-stepping cracks, things like that. The front of this looks pretty good. Now, these trees here we're going to talk about. We never like to see any trees within 10 foot of the house. Vegetation-wise, we don't want it touching the house. It's really hard on the siding. This tree definitely has the potential to damage that foundation, so my recommendation is going to be to get rid of it. Yeah, like we said, this tree here, they're both too close. These here, we don't like to see splashbacks used for our downspouts for our gutter system, because as they settle, now the water goes back towards the house. It's pretty much just like not having a downspout extension pipe. I write them up as missing. We really want that water at least 6 feet away. If our grading's not perfect, that really makes it a problem. Even with good grading, we like to see 6-foot extension pipes. Here it looks like we may have had a little bit of hail damage. There's one hole in the siding. Sometimes it's also a lawnmower, but I'm definitely going to document that there's damaged siding on this side of the house. Our gas meter here looks like somebody's freshly painted it, which is good, because if we have rust, corrosion, it likes to follow the threads in. A lot of times we'll get a gas leak when they're corroded, so I always recommend they keep those painted. Okay, we don't like to see any vegetation touching the siding. One, it's hard on the siding. Two, it just brings moisture to the house. Other than that, we have a little better grading on this side. Again, we like to see downspout extension pipes. Up here on the edge of the roof, I like to see that flashing. We always like to see gable and drip edge flashings. It does help prevent ice damming. Most of our Colorado jurisdictions started requiring that 2006. So I like to tell my clients it looks like we have a more recent roof. When we're on the roof, we'll be able to see more of the date and actually see the actual condition of it. But like I said, at least keep that vegetation trimmed up so it doesn't touch the house. Okay, I like to make sure we close the gates in case there's pets, dogs, things like that. Over here, we have a missing downspout extension pipe. They're relying on a splashback, which is now settled, and it's actually sloping towards the house. Our patio over here is concrete. It's now sloping towards the house also. Maybe a direct cause of this water just going underneath it and washing away. If you look about 6 feet away, we actually slope away from the house. So this is a trip hazard, plus it's a water hazard, because now that water is going to slope towards the house. I like to tell my clients, our job is to point out every defect we see. Priority-wise, I look at number one is safety, because it'll hurt them or kill them. Two is water, because it can easily bankrupt you. You know, most people can't afford to fix a foundation, or if they can, they'd much rather go on vacation than pay to fix that foundation. So water is very, very detrimental. You know, anything they can do to remove it from the house is a good thing. Over here, a little bit of warp siding. You know, all that tells me is somebody had their gas grill too close to the house. I do typically advise my clients to have at least a couple feet away or to put it out here on the end so that they don't have that problem. We can see up here, they've added soffit venting, which is lower roof venting. That's good because it'll help keep a cooler attic. It'll make our shingles last longer. It'll make a healthier house. Okay, we are missing the glass globe. I'll talk to my clients about it. We typically don't make a huge deal of that though, but we do like to have that sealed up because of the electrical and the water issue. Here we have an electrical panel. You know, first thing I always do is tug on this, make sure somebody hasn't cut or compromised our Excel tag or utility tag. Here we have an older panel. It is a split bus, which means these four up here are for our 240s. This one actually shuts off this. First thing you want to do is always brush it to make sure that it's not hot, not live. Okay. I always get in the habit of use a pen for this so that I don't accidentally touch something that's going to hurt me. But part of our industry standards is we're supposed to know what we have for electrical wiring. Here we can see it's copper. Here we can see some aluminum for our 240s. We still use that today. Here I'm going to check. We have 14 gauge wiring, so we have 15 amp breakers. Here we have 12 gauge wiring, we have 20. Multis, so we do have 150 that's not currently in use. Maybe somebody had a hot tub, it's hard to say. But you know, it is a pretty full panel. There are a couple things down here. There's no legend up here, it's missing. So when I write this up, I'm going to say amperage not determined because we have no main breaker. I happen to know what size this is, but I'm not going to put it in my report just in case somebody has any questions. Here, if you come over to this side, you're going to see we have aluminum wiring. This right here looks like a copper crimp, which means that they have had some work done on it. But if you just look right here, you're going to see all these shrink wraps. It looks like it's copper. You need to look, especially when you consider the age of the house. You know, in Colorado, we used aluminum extensively from 69 to about 74. We've even seen it back in the early 60s, but it's not that common. So I'm going to have a note in my report that says there's been documented problems associated with aluminum wiring. Recommend they get it completely evaluated. Although I'm going to talk to my client and tell them it looks like they've had the copper aluminum crimps done, which is a good repair. Actually here, there's a sticker that says when that was done. It was done 9/10/2014. And it was done by the Aluminum Repair Inc. company. I think that's Alex's company. But they should be able to get some documentation on that to make sure it was all done. Their insurance company may require that. And always make sure you close it completely. Make sure you get it tight for waterproof. Colorado is one of the few jurisdictions you're going to find an electrical panel outside. We typically don't see a lot of problems with it. I know a lot of people think it's nuts, but it does work out here, and that way we don't have to take interior space to do it. Now, I will mention to my clients that this is not a frost-free hose faucet. If they were going to do any upgrades, that'd be a good idea. Otherwise, in the winter, this should be turned off so that we don't have freeze problems. Coming over here, I'm looking at this spot. The grading's not great. We're a little bit negative. I'm looking at this mulch right here. This is old mulch, this is new mulch. I like to at least kick it a little bit and see what I see underneath it. Okay, when I'm seeing nothing, I just keep moving it. Now I'm already down to the point where I have mulch deeper than I have the dirt. So I know the grading's negative here. I just don't know how negative. So I'm gonna write this up as a grading issue, but I'm also gonna note that the mulch prevented me from seeing all this. Because, you know, we could have a foot, we could have 2 feet, we could have a big hole here. So they need to take care of this, need to pull back the mulch and bring some dirt in, otherwise they're gonna have more of a problem. Okay, let's talk about my truck for a second. We're getting ready to go on the roof. I've set up my truck so that I actually have 4 ladders in here right now. A lot of times I'll have 5 ladders. But I have my outside shoes on right here. Here I have my inside shoes, plus I put booties on. That way nobody complains, I don't get their floors dirty, things like that. You gotta remember, we're going into somebody's house, we have to show that house respect because, you know, we don't own it, we're never gonna own it, but somebody else is and somebody currently does. So this here is one of my inside ladders, this is one of my inside ladders. These are my two outside ladders. I don't like to mix them because, you know, you're gonna get the house dirty. You're gonna get grass, you're gonna get mud, things like that, especially as wet as we've been here in Colorado right now. You know, plus you wanna make sure it's always safe. So if you have stuff on your ladder and you move it, it might slip on the hardwood floors. So you always wanna make sure that you have good pads. Put this right here. Ladder safety is priority. Most of our home inspector accidents involve ladders. You know, they are very scary if you don't place them correctly. I really like to put them on the grass, not on concrete, but when it's wet like we have right here, we actually have to use the driveway. It's probably the safest thing we have. Now for safety, we need to make sure we have at least 2 rungs above the roof. I really prefer 3. You want to make sure you don't scratch your gutters, so set it down very gently. One of the ways you can check your ladder, you should just be at arm's reach when your toes are touching the ladder. That way you have a nice slope on it, it's not liable to come back at you. Yeah, always make sure you have at least 3 points of contact with the ladder, which means 1 hand, 2 feet. When you're putting on your safety strap, or I like to use a safety strap, you know, just tie it to the gutters. That way the wind can't blow your ladder off. You always want to be at least 2 rungs above the roof. I prefer more because then I can have a really nice solid connection. This here is the ridge venting. You know, we like to see upper roof venting. Sometimes we'll use a square or turtle vent. We do consider this superior. It goes along with the soffit venting we saw down below. I always walk clockwise rotation, whether I'm doing a roof or doing the inside of the house. The big thing is to just get a system and keep to it. If you always walk a certain direction, it's really simple because then you know that you already saw that other side. Remember, never walk backwards on a roof. That is unsafe. It's very easy to fall off the edge. Now looking back here, this gutter is full of water. Looks like it may not slope correctly. It does have some debris in it, but this side over here is completely full. This side isn't. So when I'm down, I'll take another look at the slope of this gutter, but I'll also mention it has standing water in it that doesn't appear to be draining correctly. I like to see silicone on our bolts here. I can see where they've siliconed a few holes up. These are always kind of moisture penetrations. Just like a nail in a shingle, we always want to see caulking on top of them. Here's our main house flue. We have some deteriorated paint. Want to look at this for cracking, corrosion, damage, things like that. Want to make sure our sewer boots have been replaced. Most of our jurisdictions require they be painted. It does make them hold up better for the UV sun. Here we have an evaporative cooler or a swamp cooler. I will note that the lower flashing is loose. It looks like it's winterized, so we can't run it. I do try to look up a little bit and see what kind of corrosion we have. You're not required to take the cover off, but it definitely looks like it needs to be serviced. Doesn't look like it's terribly old. You know, tell them to ask the seller how old it is, but my suspicions are it was replaced with the roof. Now here we have a tree that's really close. The recommendation is get rid of the tree, but do look at the gutters, see how much debris is in them. Actually not as much as I thought there was going to be. A lot of times we'll see soffit damage when this situation occurs just because the gutters can't keep up. We have a ridge vent here. Our shingles look good. I'm going to come over here where I can stand and I'm going to look and see how many layers we have. And here, this furnace flue or a roof flue flashing is loose also. So I'm going to make a note about this. Does look like we have 1 layer. So I'd write this up as a composite roof with 1 layer. I just changed into my inside shoes. I also put booties on. You know, we have to remember to respect the property we're in. It's not ours. It's never going to be ours. You know, your clients are buying the house, you're not. So I always put booties on. I won't walk in the house that I don't own without them. When I first get to the house, I like to come in and just take a bunch of pictures. And I take 3, 4 of every room. At this time, I'm going to turn on the oven. A little bit later, then I switch it over to broil, but that way when I come in and inspect the kitchen, I turn the oven off, so I don't go home wondering at night if the oven's still on. You know, also, you know, when I start the inspection, I come back and I start right here. I always work in a clockwise rotation around the house. You know, I'll do this room, the next room, work my way up, and I finish in the basement. You know, you want to get a systematic approach. It doesn't matter if you do clockwise, counterclockwise, but you want to do the same house or same way every house. It doesn't matter if the house is 10,000 square foot, 1,000 square foot. You know, the worst day, and this happened to me when I was very new in the business, I came in and I checked things and kind of worked around. I had to go back that night and knock on the door and ask if I could inspect the fireplace. Now, when I do my systematic approach, I come to the fireplace, I inspect it. So always get in a routine, always do the same inspection. If somebody asks you to come look at something, just set your bag down, go back to your bag, and you can start the inspection again. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to take a bunch of pictures, and we'll come back to the door, we'll start the inspection. Now, I do always make sure I get a picture of everybody who is in the inspection in the report. Or not in the report, but on my camera. That way, if they call you down the road, you can remember what your client looked like. You know, when you do 4,000 or 400, 500 inspections a year, you're not going to remember everybody's face. So that way you can put the name to the face. It's much easier when you're talking to them down the road. When I get in, I like to turn the oven on when I'm coming around and taking my pictures. That way, when I start inspecting, I'll come in, I'll switch it over to broil. But that way, when I get to actually inspect the kitchen, I turn the oven off. That way at night, I'm not wondering, did I leave the oven on? You know, I've done that. Nobody likes doing that. You know, it's not something we want to do. So any system you can come up with that's going to prevent that is a good thing. You know, just looking at this, I'm going to do some of the obvious right now as I'm walking through, like type of plumbing, the floor structure, things like that. But we're looking at a gas oven. A gas oven is supposed to have an external discharge fan. I'm not seeing any venting system for the house. So I'm going to write that up as safety, as a gas oven's allowed to put out 800 parts per million carbon monoxide. You know, you don't want to be breathing that. So I'll talk to my cousins or my clients. One of the options is to open the window for now, but the long-term solution really is to get a venting system in here. Now right over here is the garage. I'm going to snap a couple pictures. You know, we should have a self-closing fire-rated door. You know, this one here looks like a new door, but it doesn't close. So I'll be writing that in the report. When I come in and inspect the garage, I'm going to do a much more thorough job than this. But just looking up here, I can see there's a radon mitigation system. That's what that fan is right there. I actually heard it venting on the outside of the house earlier when I was on the roof, so I suspected we had one. But I want to make sure this was done to the current standards. And like right now, I'm going to write down in my report the closure was missing. And like I said, these are just little things I'm doing as I take the pictures. We really haven't started the inspection yet. You know, we're going to do all this as we go through. Now this is also where I'm going to start the dishwasher. Today we're just doing this as a training video. They're not ready to run this right now. Just to save water, we're not going to actually run it, but I do run every one where we're doing this. And I explain to my clients that we're really not testing the appliance. You know, any built-in is part of the standards, but most of them we're using just to load test the house, check the plumbing for leaks, things like that. So we use this to check the plumbing system. Now we don't like to see anything over a 4-inch opening here. These are quite large, so definitely, you know, a safety hazard for small children. I'm also going to have a note that the basement stair railing is missing. The other thing, these are not graspable. Age of the house, they weren't required, but I'm going to talk to my client about doing some upgrades. As long as we're standing right here, this acoustic ceiling, this is a 1972 house. That could easily be asbestos. We are not asbestos inspectors. Not part of our standard. You know, we don't need to, and most people don't do it. I do tell, and I do put it in my report, that due to the age of the house, this may contain asbestos, and that before they scrape it, they should have it tested. They should be very careful around it in the meantime. Okay, coming upstairs. First thing I see is this right here. That smoke detector is yellow. They do make them out of a resin that turns yellow on purpose. That's one of the ways we can date them. Smoke detectors are good for 8 to 10 years. That one looks like it's older than that. My recommendation is going to be Consumer Product Safety Commission. They recommend a smoke detector in each bedroom is slept in, common area, each level of the house. Smokes are good for 8 to 10 years. So that's what my report says. Colorado has a CO detector law. The seller has to provide a CO detector within 15 foot of each sleeping area. I'm going to look for that, but again, I'm going to refer to the Consumer Product Safety Commission because they recommend one each finished level of the house. So my note's going to say at this point, unless I see one in the bedrooms, that they do not have. Coming into the bathroom, we're only going to inspect one bathroom today. We want to give them the house back, but of course, when you're doing the home inspection, you'd inspect both or all 3 bathrooms. First thing I do is just kind of come in and give the toilet a nudge. I don't want to rip it out of the floor, but I do want to see if it's loose. A lot of times they'll rock, a lot of times they'll move. Whenever I see that, I tell them that the wax seal may be leaking. I turn the water on. I check our drain stopper. I let that run a while, see what our hot water temperature comes to. We never want to see it above 124 degrees. If we start seeing a lot of steam roll off that, that's my indication it might be too hot. Look in here, you know, we got some discolored caulking. It's black. You know, we're not mold inspectors. Could it be mold? Yes. If it's not sampled, I can't tell them that. But I can definitely say, hey, this is all deteriorated. It should really be stripped. It should be cleaned and it should be recaulked. Now what I'm looking for under here is to make sure we have a proper P-trap. I like to look to see if we have individual water shutoff valves. They weren't a requirement. We're inspecting houses as is, but if they're not there, I usually talk to my clients and say, you know, if you do any remodeling, it's a good idea to add them. On a newer house, it is a requirement. So when I turn the shower on, I put the drain stopper on to see if it does actually hold water. Check to make sure hot's hot, cold's cold. Now, since we do not have a window here, it's a requirement we have a fan. That fan is a little bit noisy, so I'm going to put that in my report. It doesn't look like it's been vacuumed or cleaned. Over here we have a Gfci outlet, which is great. Going to check it like this. I also have one of these. I like to use this on older houses to see if we have a real ground. Also, with aluminum wiring, one of our problems is voltage drops. So I like to see what we have for a voltage drop. We still have 115 volts, a 4% drop at 15 amps. That's looking pretty good. Like I say, this house looked like it had copper crimps put on. So I would expect to see some good numbers. A lot of times when I find a house with the wrong outlets for aluminum wiring, we'll start dropping ground circuits and I'll get a really high voltage drop. So this is one of the ways I check that. Okay, coming in, first thing I look up, do we have any smoke detectors? No. So they have the one in the common, which is what we used to do. But like I say, Consumer Product Safety Commission recommends each bedroom. So my report's going to say add smoke detectors per Consumer Product Safety Commission. And I'm going to talk to my clients about it. But when I come in, we're just going to check a few outlets, but typically you check every accessible outlet, you check every accessible window. You know, you're not required to climb over beds, you're not required to move furniture, things like that. In fact, you don't want to get in that habit because it's easy to break things. But we want to do that you know, write down any cases of reverse polarity, things like that. These are TR or tamper resistant outlets. Tells me somebody's done quite a bit to the electrical system. Well, that date, there was a date code on the panel that said September 2014, the copper aluminum crimps had been put in. So that's probably when a lot of this work was done. Sometimes that means we had a real estate transaction then. Sometimes they were just doing it for safety. Now this one here, we're not required to look any outlets, but this one has 6.7% voltage drop. The others were 3 and 4. So since this isn't painted, I'm just going to look behind there and see what it looks like going on. See if we had the copper aluminum crimps, see if we had wire nuts. Now we are a visual inspection. We can use a screwdriver, but what I want to look here is see what's going on. Now I can see the copper aluminum crimps. All that looks good. I'm not seeing any discoloration. So it looks like this is all right. Just a little bit more of a drop that I was expecting to have. I might talk to my clients and say, this one had a little bit excessive voltage drop compared to the others, but we are farther away from the electrical panel, so we would expect to see some kind of a voltage drop difference that way. But whenever I see something that's different, it's when I like to do a little bit more further evaluation just to make sure we're good. 'Cause sometimes they'll miss an outlet and we'll still have a wire nut or we'll have something improper on that. It looks like I can get at this window even though we have some knickknacks there, but we're going to close the windows, make sure they lock securely. Now, one thing we run into once in a while is a low window in a bedroom. I do like to write that up as safety and talk to them about young kids. You know, they want to put a lock on the window so it can't be opened very far because you wouldn't want a child to fall out of one of them. Here's the closet. One of the things we look for here, this is the fluorescent light bulb. That's fine. We want to make sure we're not seeing incandescents in a closed closet because they are a fire hazard. Okay. Now I like to close the door from both angles. When the door's been replaced, it doesn't tell me as much as if it's an original door. Sometimes that will tell us movement inside the house. Do we have cracking, things like that. We have a little crack up here, which isn't a real uncommon place to have a crack, but it does tell me I want to look when I get downstairs, just see if everything adds up. Here's the attic access. That's typically the last place I go. I usually look if we have a crawl space, which this house has a crawl space and a partial basement. Whichever is dirtier is where I'm going to finish my inspection because I want to respect the house and not get it dirty. That window looks like it might be a little bit high to me for current standards. Yeah, and it's at 44 inches. We really want to see egress window at 42. So I tell my clients, you know, while that did comply, it probably doesn't comply anymore. So if you're going to replace windows, which these are done, some of our jurisdictions require you actually put a bigger window there. So, you know, I just like to educate them on that. You know, as is, that window works fine. Sometimes people will actually put a step there. If they have little kids, they should make it easier for them to get out. Again, we have no smoke detectors. Didn't see any CO detectors down here. So, you know, I'm going to make that recommendation. Here's our common area smoke. Back here, this is where the grading wasn't good. So I'm going to look here to see if we have any signs of moisture intrusion, damage, things like that. If I see anything, I'll use both an infrared and a moisture meter to see if it's actually wet at this time. Right now it's looking pretty good. We'll come back to this and address it shortly. Now in here's our mechanicals, or no, this is our laundry with our mechanicals back here. So, gonna look, is it accessible? We have our 3 foot in front of this. These are removable, so our water heater can be put in the back corner. I'm gonna look and see this furnace, try and get a better age on it, just because it looks like they're using inside combustion air. 2002, we started requiring outside, so I'm gonna look at that. Whenever we have, looks like an 83% efficient furnace, we do like to see a double wall fluid, not a single wall. I'm gonna have a note about that. And it does look like they pulled gas line, a flex gas line here for the oven. Okay, we have a drip leg on a gas line. We have a 2004 water heater. So my report's gonna put near the end of its useful life. Typically we get 9 to 12 years. Well, that one's 11 years old now, so we're coming up to our time. We have a combination of copper and ABS for our waste lines, copper for our supply lines. We got a flux gas fitting. Looking at our furnace here, usually our date code is bedded into the serial. This one is prior to 1996, so it's not. It looks like it's about a 1993 from the certification date. Again, a furnace typically lasts 20 years, so I'm going to have a note that near the end of its useful life, and I'm definitely going to recommend a certification. We're going to run it, make sure everything works correctly, look at our numbers, things like that, but just by age, it's coming up to time, so you want to make sure the client knows that we're getting up there in age. Now in the report, I take a picture of your data tag, but we're also going to put the serial number and the model number for them. Has a newer igniter, so they've had some work done on this. Our gas line is rigid going out, flex here, that's what we want to see here because it's on a concrete floor. Now it's always a good idea when you're looking at a furnace to one, turn the thermostat on and run it before you inspect it. After you inspect it, turn the thermostat on and run it again. That way you know that it worked before you inspected the furnace, because sometimes they don't. You also know it worked when you left the house. That way nobody ends up with a cold house because you didn't get the bottom panel on correctly and the tamper switch is off. We have a floor drain here. Our TPR discharge is about 6 inches from the floor, so that's all right. And we do have our flexible water lines along with our flexible gas lines. So those are some of the things we're going to look for. Dryer vents. This isn't what we'd really like to see, but it is acceptable as long as it's in an exposed area. It goes out the back side of the house here, so it's a relatively short run. We don't ever want to see them over 27 feet, and you want to take off 4 for every 90. So, you know, I like to kind of look approximate. I don't measure them all, but I want to make sure that we're not just really excessive run because they're more prone to fires. Typically, I like to run the washing machine just in a rinse load just to check the water in, water out. I tell my clients that the appliances aren't part of a standard. I'm not really trying to check the washer and dryer, and if there's occupants' belongings in their clothes, I'm not going to run them. But I do like to see something move. Just so we know we don't have any leaks in the waste line. You know, we're going to do a visual. I'm going to check both of our outlets. The 240 I'm going to check with my multimeter. This one here I'm just going to check with my voltage tester. And then we're going to do a visual on the back side. Now I will mention to my clients, this pipe right here, there is a clean out behind the washing machine here. So if they're going to get a sewer scope, which the age of the house, that's a definite recommendation, that is where they're probably going to need to do it. So they may ask the seller to remove this so they can get a sewer scope done just so it doesn't get damaged. Crawl space, again, you want to make sure you get in here safely. Sometimes they're a little difficult. Here, looks like we have a pipe for our mitigation system. Really is nice when we see where they drilled into the concrete here to mitigate both sides of the foundation. I'm not seeing it right off. Usually when I see that, I recommend, you know, the house is always supposed to be tested for radon, but that we test on the other side. Sometimes they'll test both sides, but when I see this one's mitigated for sure, I want to make sure that side's working also. Here we have regulated water. Here's our main water shutoff. This is an old style gate valve. I do tell my clients, you know, while they're still used, if it's ever replaced, most people are going to use a ball valve just so they have a lever, less chance for leaks. Here, this should be sealed all the way. We want to look at our supports here. Make sure that they're nice and plumb, that they are connected all the way around. And we're going to look, there's a little bit of efflorescence on the back foundation wall. We had an issue with grading back there at the patio, so that's not real surprising. Now we do have a pretty good crack right here. Usually what happens is the water comes down and it finds your foundation rebar, and the rebar corrodes and expands. That's exactly what we're looking at right there. There we can actually see the foundation rebar. We are not structural engineers. How I usually address this is I'll write this up as a long horizontal crack on the crawl space rear foundation wall. I always recommend in my summary that they have further evaluation about structural engineer. This here, most structural engineers will recommend epoxy injection. We can see we have water coming through, but they really need to fix the source of this water on the back side of the house. If that patio is not fixed, if the gutter downspouts aren't fixed, and this is actually where the gutter was full of water also, it doesn't matter what they do, it's just going to keep coming back. So like I said, water will bankrupt you. They always have to fix the water first before we bother fixing any of this. You know, the good news is the rest of the foundation here looks pretty good. So there's some repair to do on this wall. When I put my hand down here, I'm not really feeling a lot of movement this way, but I'm seeing a lot of corrosion, a lot of deterioration. Here's actually, since the mitigation system was put in, this is falling apart. So that's really easy if a lot of our mitigators put a date on the mitigation system so we know when it's put in. So we know this damage has happened since then. Here you can see we have a little bit more movement here. So this wall is actually being pushed in like this. We have a crack here, so that also is coming like this. You can see this continues. It may continue all the way back into the basement foundation wall. So that's something I need to take a better look at back behind that water heater. So I'll probably have to try to work my way back in behind the laundry there. But they have to fix the water. And like I say, most recommendations would be to epoxy inject, reseal the backside of this. Just get this sealed up because you can see this efflorescence. That's all your mineral when the water evaporates. So this is a fairly significant issue that should be addressed as soon as possible so it doesn't become bigger, because that wall will just continue to move. This is actually where we're doing the suction for the radon mitigation system. They put a flex pipe all the way around, kind of like a subsurface drainage system. This is all sealed. Liquid nail may not be exactly the best type of sealant, but it is secure. I can't move anything, it's all tight. Like I say, I definitely could hear air movement on the roof. When we're in the garage, we'll look at the YouTube and see what our vacuum readings are. When I was on the outside of the house, I did see some crawl space vents, but in here I can't see any. We would like to really see some venting still going on, although now that they've sealed this, a lot of people will eliminate those and they'll actually use our HVAC system to vent this area. So we'll use conditioned air down here. Makes a warmer floor, but it also seems to work really well in our climate. Different climates, different areas of the country have different venting requirements. Just like an attic, when I'm in a crawl space, I take a picture before I go in, I take a picture afterwards. That way if somebody ever says you left the crawl space door, the attic access door off, you can say you didn't. Now, what happens is, we point out a lot of issues. Then they get the next contractor come in to look at something. He may not put it together right. Or, like this here, this trim was loose and damaged before we went into it. You may be accused of causing that damage. So if we have a picture before we went into it, pictures inside it, pictures coming out. Just like a furnace, we take a picture before we take it apart. I take a picture of the data tag, and then I take a picture when it's back together running. That way we can always show that we put things together. It's kind of your trail of work. Now, we wanted to look, see if we could see anything back in this corner. And actually, unfortunately, it's going to be the bathroom. So we may or may not be able to see this, where that crack goes to. But we're going to come back here and look. And yes, we can't see anything. This is the tile, but see this right here? You can see this tile's popping apart. That could either be water damage, or it could be that foundation crack that we have coming across this back wall. So it definitely needs further evaluation, definitely needs repairs. When I see a movement like this, my suspicion is this is caused by the foundation, not caused so much by water. So Definitely need a structural engineer here to evaluate and recommend repairs. Now remember, it's not our job to tell them how to fix something. In fact, most things, if we tell them how to fix it, we're crossing the line. You cannot act as a structural engineer. I can't tell you, you need to epoxy inject that. We can talk about typical repairs. A lot of times they'll do this, a lot of times they'll do that. But you can't say you need to get this epoxy injected or you need to get helical piers on this. That's way beyond the scope of a home inspection. It's way beyond what we're supposed to do. Your job is to point out the defect. That wall's cracked, we have efflorescence, moisture intrusion. They need to get further evaluation. That's what they need to do. Coming into the garage. Should have a self-closer on that door. Coming into here, we're going to check a few things for safety, but right now I'm looking at the mitigation system. Here we have a U-tube. We actually have a fire collar here. We need to see that, so that's good. This just tells us that the fan is working. It does not tell us radon levels. That's a fallacy. I hear that a lot by my clients. It's like, oh, well, they have 1 picocurie radon. I can see it right there. It's like, no, that just tells me my fan's working. We come up through the ceiling. We have a mitigation fan in the ceiling of the garage. Because this has no livable space above it, it is acceptable to have that in the garage. So this looks good. I'm pretty comfortable with how it was installed. Like I said, it would have been nice to have a suction onto that basement floor. Depending on how deep the foundation is, the crawl space one might mitigate it, it might not. So we're going to test the radon on that side of the house. Coming through here, when the door's down, I like to look, make sure our hinges all look good. Make sure I'm not seeing a lot of slipping movement, which tells me my screws are loose. Looks like we have safety springs up here, so it's a steel door. Looks like a relatively new door. We're going to open it. We're going to check both our optic eyes. We're going to check our close force adjustment. That is safety for little kids, so we definitely want to make sure those are checked. Coming through here, going to look at our walls. Everything we can see, I'm going to put a note in my report the walls aren't completely visible due to occupants' belongings, but we're going to look and we're going to document anything we can see. Outlets, we want to check them, see if they're GFCI protected, if they're wired correctly, all those kind of things. There is an attic access right up there. You want to be careful when you do climb in there that you don't break or damage this radon mitigation system. Now I like to check my reverse stop first, because if it's not adjusted right, then I can do my optic eyes. But it does work. Might be a little bit tight, so what I typically talk to my clients is about how it can be adjusted with a screw. And I usually look around the neighborhood when I live in a house. The smaller the kids, the smaller the pets, the lighter I like to see that load set. It is functioning. So now we're going to lower it, check our optic eyes. Those are more for your car. While we have the door open, it's a good time to look at our garage floor. It looks good. We'll be checking this door momentarily. I will note the missing drywall, although that's not part of a firewall, so that's not a safety issue. Okay, that works. And now here we have a solid or a newer door. If we have an old door with non-tempered glass, I usually write that up as a safety hazard for children. Also, it may be a theft issue. So if it make it too easy to come in, somebody might come in and break in. So I do like to bring that up to my clients, especially if they have a habit of leaving this door unlocked. Here I'm going to be looking at our trusses, things like that. Look for cracking. Just kind of look at the whole general shape of this garage. Over here we'll come in and we'll take a look at this window. It's too high to operate, but we can see if we have cracked glass, things like that. At this point it looks good. A newer window would be tempered. Okay, now we're going to talk about the attic inspection. Today we're not going to go in there just because this is a training inspection, but we have an attic access here. It's pretty small, but it looks like I can safely get in there. We're going to lay down drop claws. Like I say, I have inside ladders, so I'm going to put an inside ladder here. We want to make sure it's secure, that we don't have any problems. I also prop my InterNACHI sign up that asks people to please stay off it. You know, that way we don't have to worry about any little kids, things like that. I talk to my clients. They're not allowed on my attic, on my ladders. So that way we don't have that issue. When I'm in the attic, now, if you can safely enter the attic, you're supposed to enter the attic. You know, we don't just not inspect an attic because we don't want to inspect an attic. You know, standards of practice, you know, if it's safe, we need to go up there and look at it. You know, we're going to look at the amount of insulation, the type of insulation, and the roof structure. Are we trusses, are we rafters, things like that. We also want to look for our venting system, if it's adequate or not. If we can see, sometimes there's so much insulation we can't see, but we want to look at the wire and make sure we don't have any exposed wire splices, missing junction box covers. Do our bathroom fans actually vent through the roof? That's something I look at when I'm on the roof and see if I can see them, but I also look through here in the attic to make sure that we have a good venting system. If we discharge our bathroom fans in the attic, we can get a mold problem. So attic ventilation is really, really critical. The amount of insulation, you know, a lot of times we'll be recommending more for efficiency, things like that. And does our roof structure look good? You know, we talked on the outside of the house about the flashings on the roof. You know, they help prevent ice damming. Our venting system is our primary means to prevent ice damming. So we're going to look, do we have spotting on the sheathing? Do we have black? Do we have stains, water stains, things like that? If our venting system's not adequate in the northern climates, you know, we'll get a lot of ice damming going on. So we want to be careful to make sure we look at all those things when we're up there. It's awful hard to see all that from the attic access, so when you can go in safely, it is much better to be in that attic so you can actually look at everything. We're just wrapping up on the house. So what I do is I do a final walkthrough. One, I'm checking make sure all the doors are closed, making sure things are on how I left them. First thing I do is I look at the oven, make sure it is off. You know, is my dishwasher done running? While we're talking about the oven, a gas oven is supposed to be cleaned and serviced annually, just like a fireplace, just like a furnace. So you want to make sure you have that in your report. You know, we also have a venting issue here, but we want to make sure you wrote that up. Here, we got a garage door right here. I want to come, because I was here, I want to make sure that this is locked. You may not have been the last person to walk out that door. So we want to make sure that the house is secured when we go out the door. You know, your clients are going to go, they're going to look at things. They may open, they may close, they may do some things you didn't do. So you want to make sure you leave the house as you found it. Typically when I'm doing this walkthrough, I'll double check my attic access, my crawl space attic, make sure my washer and dryer are off, make sure my furnace cover plate's on, all those things, just to make sure that when we walk through, we walk out, we're done. You don't get that phone call at the end of the night saying that somebody left something apart or something's damaged, or you have a toilet leaking and now you have water damage. You know, so the last thing I do is I walk through the bathrooms, make sure the shower's off, make sure the sink's off, make sure the toilet's not running. That way my peace of mind when I leave, I'm good to go. Okay, that looks good. We're off, we're off, we're off. We can go home. Okay, the last thing we do is secure the property. Make sure it's all locked up. Make sure you have your equipment. You know, don't forget a flashlight by the attic access, things like that. But thanks for having me out. Thanks for watching, you know, the home inspection training video. This is Jim Krumm, Colorado's Best Home Inspections. You know, please follow all of our training guides.